In this lesson, we'll start to explore some of the attributes that can be found within our particle systems. Okay, so picking up where we left off in our previous lesson, you can see now we have our particles that are sort of coming out the back of this hose. Now, these still need a lot more work, so we still have a couple of lessons that we're going to spend actually sort of fixing this up. Now, in this lesson, let's come into the emitter, and let's talk about some of the different attributes that can be found inside of this particle tab. So in our previous lesson, we talked about the birth rate editor and the birth rate renderer. So this is where we can basically control the number of particles that we have here. In my case, I've bumped this up to about 2,000, so that way we have plenty of particles in here. And we've also controlled the start and stop emission of our particles. Now below here, this is where we can really start to control the overall look and behavior of our particles as far as how long they live, how fast they move, and if we have any rotation applied to these. So right now, let's come in and first talk about the speed. The speed is pretty straightforward, just controls how fast the particles are going to be moving through space. Right now, these are set to a relatively decent number, but you can see if we were to take this maybe down to something like 20, you can see our particles move very, very slowly. Okay, so in my case, with this being maybe a hose that's sort of forcefully being ejected out the back of this ship here, we'll probably want to have a little bit of force on these. And in my case, probably the default value of 150 is going to be pretty suitable for my needs. Okay, now what we can start to do is begin increasing the variation. So right now you can see that every single one of our particles is moving at the exact same speed. So that almost never happens in real life. So what we can start to do is increase this variation. So now our particles should all move at a slightly different speed. You can see that's exactly what we get. Now how much that speed varies from particle to particle is controlled by this variation. So with a variation of something like 6, you can see they all move very close to the same speed. And we can start to drive that up and get more and more difference in speed between each one of these particles. Now what we can also do is start to add a little bit of rotation to our particles and have them sort of revolve around kind of a central axis here. So if we give these a little bit of rotation, in these particular particles we may not be able to see much of a difference because they really are just kind of small little points here. But essentially now that's giving our particles a little bit more of a spin as they move through space. Now we can also maybe start to add just a little bit more variety to these particles. You can see right now they're really just sort of emitting in a very smooth, straight little line. Okay, so really they're only being emitted pretty much straight out of the end of our emitter. So if we go back to our emitter and basically go into the emitter tab, we have this option for angle horizontal and angle vertical. Now what this essentially lets us do is control the spread of our particles, and instead of having these particles emit straight out along a straight line, they're sort of going to spray out in a little bit more of a pattern. Now how widely those particles spread out as they're emitted is what's controlled by this angle horizontal and angle vertical. Right now it's set to 0, so like I said, pretty much just a straight line of particles that's going to come out. But maybe if we bump this up to maybe 40 degrees and 40 degrees. Alright, so we can see now, instead of a perfectly smooth straight line, you can see they're actually sort of spreading out. A little bit more like a water spray hose. And again, with something that is going to be sort of like this liquid oxygen that's sort of real gaseous, we want something that is going to really spread out, give that sort of a gassy, kind of forceful feel to it. Like it's really sort of being ejected out the back here. Okay, so we're starting to get there. We now have a little bit more variety in the overall movement of our particles. Now have a little bit of spread, starting to get a little bit more of a better feel here. Now one thing that I do want to control is the lifespan or the lifetime here. Right now this is set so that the particles live for 600 frames. That's probably a little bit high for me. Again, because this is going to be more of a gas, we want that gas to sort of dissipate and sort of fade away. So we're going to bump this down to maybe something like 60 frames. So once a particle is born, it will live for 60 frames and then die. So as we play that back, you can see now our particles start to fade away. Now the problem with that is it's very, very unnatural. You can see they fade away in this very, very mechanical pattern here. So let's come in and start to add a little bit of variation. So that way the particles don't all die off at the exact same time. So there we go. That's now looking much, much better. So now these just sort of randomly sort of flicker off and die away. Okay, so now we're getting really, really close. Now, the problem that we have here is that it really doesn't look like natural particle behavior once these little particles are in the air. Really, right now, Cinema 4D is just treating these as if we are in a total vacuum. So no wind, no air resistance, no gravity is interacting with these particles. So what we're going to do in our next lesson is take a look at a feature called particle modifiers. And we'll use those to get much more realistic effects and behaviors in our particles as they start to move through the air.